So we're going to be talking today about the smell of holiness. And this is one of those times when we want to be really careful about how we welcome everyone and how we're inclusive. Growing up, the incense of Christmas and Easter would trigger my asthma. And I know we have people who are scent sensitive here. So when I ask you to open this and smell it, please be sure that you close it when you're done so we don't unintentionally run anyone out. If you don't live with it, it can be strange to realize that something like smell can trigger asthma or migraines or seizures or allergies. Even when we don't live it, we are fragile. I don't know that we need a reminder of this. It feels like definitely not after the last 2 years. We know we're fragile. It almost feels mean to go here when there's so much loss and grief the last few weeks for our church family. We know we're fragile. It feels silly even to say this when people we love are dying and war is raging around the world and our ice shelves are breaking off and we just find ourselves surviving. And one of the ways that we survive is to just not care too much. We get it. We're fragile. But there's hope there too, right? We aren't the only ones asking this. Even though our reading today demonizes Judas, even his question pushes us to go, okay, so why are there so many tragedies that demand our attention, right? Why are we in this place where we have to keep money to give it to the poor? There's a crying out for an answer to how on earth we choose what to focus on. And thankfully, we don't just stick with Judas's question. We have Jesus's response. So today we have gospel hopped. We are in the Gospel of John. And if you haven't read it lately, the Gospel of John is really specific and very explicit. The purpose of this whole thing is to record some of the signs and wonders done by Jesus, to encourage folk who already believe Jesus is God, and to convert those who don't believe. The Gospel of John is gorgeous. It is where we get so much of our belief in Jesus as God. Jesus is all-knowing. Jesus is totally aware from the very beginning of everything that's going to happen to him, and doing it anyway because he holds the whole picture in his head the whole time. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's John. We also can't get away from the fact that the Gospel of John can be really problematic. It was written at a time and by an author who was in deep conflict with the majority Jewish community. And so there are all sorts of points in this text that for 2,000 years have been used to support anti-Semitism and violence. We can't ignore that the beauty and heartbreak of today come from that history and space, even if they don't show up in this particular reading. We are loaded with all sorts of emotions when we get into John. It's just one of those things that happens. We find ourselves today witnessing a gathering at the house of Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. And Lazarus is the beloved child of God over whose death Jesus wept, who was raised from the dead after his corpse had gone a bit smelly. We don't get much insight into how Lazarus is doing with all this unexpected resurrection in his own new life. But we do know that he and his sisters have remained close to Jesus. And so they're hosting a dinner for him and his close followers 6 days before the Passover. We're not quite at Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a donkey and going to his death, but we're getting very, very close. And that impending catastrophe and heartbreak are all over this text. Martha and Mary and Lazarus are having this party, and because culture and because patriarchy, Lazarus is sitting with Jesus and Martha is serving. This echoes that story from the Gospel of Luke where Martha is grumpy because Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet and Martha is doing the work of hosting. But in this story, Mary's actions go even further. Mary takes nearly 3/4 of a pound of perfume made from pure nard. So imagine like a pint container of pure perfume oil. The average annual income in Northbrook is around $120,000. So imagine $120,000 worth of pure perfume, okay? It's about the size of a pint container. And Mary comes in and covers Jesus's feet with that. She's not just like dumping it, walking away. There's a sense of the sacred. She is ritualizing the actions that would usually be done by a servant in washing feet. She's turning them into something like gratitude or worship or anointing the dead. We don't know exactly what she meant by it. We don't know what Jesus was feeling as she did this, but we get this line, the house is filled with the aroma of the perfume. Can you remember what your grandparents' house smelled like? Can you remember what Christmas smells like? Or what a funeral smells like? Do you remember what it feels like to walk into a place and be met with the smell of fresh cookies or rising bread dough or some sort of roast? Right, the house is filled with the aroma. So if you're comfortable, grab your little baggie. Right, we have a 20th century version of spikenard essential oil. So this is not as strong as it would have been. It is certainly not as costly as what they were dealing with, but you get a sense of what it means to have the whole house full of this aroma. You can't shake it. There's no getting away from this gesture. And then in the midst of this aroma just rising up, Mary takes it one step further and dries Jesus's feet with her hair. This isn't just anointing, this is love. Women's hair was covered in public as a sign of modesty. To use her hair to wipe off a man's feet was an intimate gesture full of love. It's also one of sacrifice, as she is breaking some rules around what is respectable and what is not. And in this moment, Jesus allows himself to be ministered to. Jesus knows everything that's going to happen and recognizes his own need to be loved. He allows this gesture of love and anointing. He knows he is fragile. Jesus knows we are fragile. And Jesus knows deeply how much our being fragile is just all linked up and woven in with our lives being precious. Mary's anointing sets up the holiness of everything that's going to happen in the next week for Jesus. This anointing predicts Jesus washing his disciples' feet in a few days. And Mary's anointing leads us back to this unspoken question. Why does Jesus have to die? Why do any of us have to die? Mary's anointing pushes us to Judas's question too. Why couldn't she just give the money to the poor? They know it. They know they need it. She knows they need it. Why is it that so many places demand our attention because they are tragic and sad? How on earth could we forget we're fragile when we're just surrounded by all this suffering and it weighs us down because we can't fix it? What on this earth are we supposed to do about any of it, right? There were all these questions in there with Judas's question. Why do we even have to be fragile? Why can't we just be immortal, right? Why can't we just never suffer? And then there's Jesus' answer, leave her alone. It's very direct, right? I hear your question, stop it. This perfume was to be used in preparation for my burial, and this is how she has used it. She's preparing me for my burial while I am alive and still get to receive the blessing of her love and know it, instead of having it be a blessing for my body. And then it keeps going. You will always have the poor among you, but you won't always have me. This one, I really don't like, right? You'll always have the poor among you, but you won't always have me. It's hopeless, right? Give up, stop trying. You're always going to have the poor. It feels yucky and heavy. And that's not where I think we should go with it. In his infinite wisdom, Jesus is acknowledging the hard truth that there will always be work to do. But that work can't keep us from the sacred. So long as there is life on this beautiful, broken planet, there will always be sin and systems of sin, and so there will always be work for us to do. The poor will always be with us, but not because God's just like, oh, they should suffer. The poor will always be with us, and not because we should just ignore them. The poor will always be with us because of the world we live in, and the people we love won't always be there. And so we are called to work for justice and serve the poor, and we are called to cherish the people we love and show them love. And if that love pours out of us like a pint of expensive perfume and fills the whole house and mirrors this expansive, elaborate, lavish love that God has, then so be it. That too is a reminder of what it means to be alive. And if this love pours out of us in kneeling at the feet of the poor and serving them and helping them and working to do whatever we can to make those lives better, then so be it. Because that too is a reminder of what it means to be alive. There's a sort of feeling that's all over this passage. It's like that clenched feeling where the back of your tongue hits the roof of your mouth and you just know something's gonna happen next. There's beauty, and there's love, and there's fear, and there's sorrow, and there is sadness, and we know this is a point where Jesus is telling his friends he's gonna die. And even this happens in the context of resurrection. We're acknowledging that Jesus is going to die in the house of a man who was once quite dead and is now very alive. The smell of anointing oil is heavy in the air, and that feel of resurrection, of mystery, of possibility, and the unknown is just thick all around them. And I think we sit in the midst of that mix now, too. We know all too well that we are fragile. We know all too well the helplessness of death and the longing to just anoint our beloveds extravagantly, to pour out our love in ways that are unmistakable and meet the needs of those we love. And we know that nothing is going to stop the inevitable. And yet, at our roots, Christians are incarnational. We believe that bodies matter. We believe that what we do matters. At our roots, we are a resurrection people. These bodies that matter are not all there is, and their fragile end is not the end of all we are. We don't know exactly what comes next, but we know that God does not stop loving us, and we don't stop existing just because we have died. The hope and promise of resurrection is that even in our fragility, life is a gift and can be full of beauty and joy. And the gift of Jesus is that we are the ones who get to help bring that beauty and joy to each other and to the world. Thanks be to God.